welcome to today's webinar. The topic is the 4 pillars of sourcing success. I'm Richard Waugh from Zycus. We're pleased to be the sponsor for our today, and I'm also very pleased to be joined by 2 eminent experts who know quite a bit about sourcing success. I want to introduce them to you as our panelists today for the webinar. First is Andrew Bartolini. He's the Chief Research Officer for Ardent Partners. He's a recognized expert in this space, 15 years of experience, a pro to know in all respects, and really an expert both from an advisory standpoint. He publishes a significant amount of research in the space through the CPO Rising website as well, and he's going to be sharing with us to research the state of strategic sourcing 2015 and really elaborating on those key 4 pillars of success for some that we mentioned. Myself included, I'm with Zycus, again, VP of Corporate Development. I'm your moderator for today. And I'm very pleased to be joined by Sonia Jimenez, who's category manager for the E&J Gallo winery. And she has a rich experience and background in the space, covering multiple categories and functional roles within supply chain, new products, and IT as a sourcing and procurement. She's also established J. Gallo's Procurement Academy as a way to develop and procurement talent going forward for her business. And with what I'd like to do is first ask Andrew to share with us some of the insights from the research, and along the way, I'll ask Sonia to bring in her expert insights as well from being a leading practitioner in the space, and we'll also invite our audience participants to weigh in and interact with us by way of some poll questions that we'll have throughout the session. And I'll mention, just before turning it over to Andrew as well, that should you have any other additional questions, feel free to type those through the Q&A chat box in the WebEx platform, and we'll do our best, time permitting, to address as many of those questions as we can. So, without further ado, Andrew.
Thank you, Richard. Good day, everybody. What you see here is the agenda that we're going to sort of walk you through. I think we've got some live poll questions, too, so I think it's going to be a very interesting and exciting presentation. It's a topic that I've dedicated the past 15 years of my professional career, and that's strategic sourcing. So let's just dive in, right? Let's look at the state of strategic sourcing on the next 2 slides, actually. And so that's me again, and this is our event that we're planning for. Well, that's fine. We could, you gave me a great introduction, Richard. We can just move on to the next slide, and I can just highlight that if you find today's topic of interest, would certainly invite those of you that are working in procurement and sourcing today to consider coming to our inaugural CPO Rising event, which is a day-and-a-half symposium focusing on topics like this, what are best practices in strategic sourcing, and great networking opportunity as well. But I want to turn now to the research and talk about a little bit about our process for the new report that Zycus is a sponsor of and is going to be able to distribute to those of you listening in today. We, as far as the firm, we have a very rigorous approach to developing and creating a web-based survey, capturing a large amount of data, interviewing some of the executives who participated in the survey, and ultimately coming up with a picture that we think presents a state of procurement and a state of strategic sourcing. For this specific effort, we had 330 CPOs and other procurement executives that participated. And I'll talk a little bit about the demographics on the next slide, where we had a very senior level participation, right? So, really drawn from the senior ranks of sourcing and procurement organizations, primarily coming from procurement. The data does tilt a little bit towards large enterprises, which we would call those companies that have more than one more than dollars in annual revenues, and then it does tilt a little bit towards North America and Northern Europe as well. So let's talk a little bit about the state of strategic sourcing, right? From our point of view and from our perspective, sourcing remains as relevant and as critical to the fabric of the procurement organization, but even more so to the fabric of the enterprises that you're working with and working in today. Operating in an age of innovation, organizations have necessarily become more reliant upon their suppliers, more reliant upon the relationships that they have with their strategic suppliers and their tactical suppliers to ultimately drive value into their products and services. And really, let's take a look at some of the key findings from this research effort with the next slide. And so, what are procurement organizations, what are sourcing teams focused on, and how are they, executing against those business pressures? And what we see here is something that we've seen. I've written a report like this annually for the past 10 years, and what we've seen is that time and time again, procurement organizations are under pressure to deliver savings. But what I think is interesting is that in the past couple of years, we've seen that pressure recede, and that pressure, I think, has receded in part tied to the business cycle, right? And organizations are a little bit more focused on growth and revenue opportunities. But I think also that over the past decade of doing this specific research study, procurement organizations have been successful in expanding the value proposition and having that better understood by organizations to really understand that it's not savings is not the end all and the be all of what value procurement can deliver. Let's look at the next slide and what top challenges are for sourcing organizations. What we see here, again, I think are the classic challenges for organizations who still in large degree struggle with mapping their processes to systems and getting that right. I think that's certainly other top challenges that sourcing organizations have, really relate to talent and staff constraints. And part of that challenge is viewed from the just headcount standpoint, right? I think that it's standard operating procedure for sourcing organizations today to feel and literally be understaffed. The challenge is that the procurement and sourcing purview continues to expand, particularly as procurement and sourcing organizations look to place more spend under management, are given other responsibilities, tackling new categories. It's the increase is not commensurate with often that expansion in duties, and I think the other component of that, and really what we were actually just talking about before we got on the call, was the level of talent that exists within organizations as well. As procurement's role continues to expand within the enterprise, as it really has become a true hub of business operations and results, and really is that linchpin or that link out into the innovation that exists within the supply chain. The skill sets, with the shift and the change in the role that sourcing is playing within organization, the skill sets are also needing to change as well. And I would say that most sourcing organizations, or at least the CPO'S and leaders of those groups, feel that the talent hasn't kept pace as well. So a few challenges here.
Andrew, it sounds like if you like a challenge, sourcing is the place to be, right? As you've discussed, it's now the need to balance the focus with cost reduction, but kind of a newer focus on growth initiatives and additional sources of value well on the cost reduction, and do that at a time when it's challenging to develop the talent and skills necessary to achieve those dual objectives. And at this point, Sonia, would really be interested in your perspective as a leading practitioner that faces these challenges, on a daily basis. What would you say at Gallo are some of the top sourcing challenges that you're faced with today, and what are some of the strategies that you've developed?
Thanks, Richard. Hey, everyone, this is Sonia. So this resonates a lot with what we're currently feeling right now. So what we're focusing and the challenges that we face this year were, how do we find new avenues of delivering value other than cost, right? We better leverage our current technologies and also people, right? How can we train our current staff to help improve the skill set and gain that skill set that is needed? So a couple of examples on delivering, value other than, cost. One of the things that we've started in the past couple of years is we've done a supplier summit where we invite our top key suppliers and our executives in a one-day kind of gathering where we discuss goals and priorities and kind of the change of the business, and really just trying to open up the discussions of communications. It's a way to expand our sourcing network with our suppliers and making us a little bit more agile. And what we ask and what we get from that is we ask our partners to then come back and give us innovative ideas from what they heard from, and then we go through them and then select a couple of those ideas that we'll execute for the end of the year. So that has been very successful, and we've got some very key wins from that. And then just another example, for people, as mentioned earlier, we've implemented a Procurement Academy program. This is the second year, and it really just focuses on providing a curriculum at different levels for different skill sets. And basically, the goal of the program is for the individuals to take a self-skill assessment in the beginning of the year, and then focus on increasing or improving that skill rating, from fundamental to intermediate. And so we've been seeing a dynamic of collaboration and from our folks from that program.
So very tangible examples of successful strategies that you've implemented to address some of these key challenges. I mean, talk about making that shift from kind of historic focus almost exclusively on cost reduction to now a growth orientation. We have the Supply Summit to engage and create with those suppliers who, let's face it, are going to be the source of a lot of that innovation and growth that we're able to accomplish, as well as you've addressed the tech development challenge through the Procurement Academy approach. So very tangible and innovative examples that you shared with us on ways to address some challenges. So at this point, wanted to open up the plane then to our audience to get a sense of what's top of mind in terms of some of the key challenges across the board for some procurement teams. And the options that we've listed here, number one is that sort of traditional and, as you pointed out, ongoing focus. It may not be the only thing that people are concentrating on, but savings and cost reduction is still a major challenge initiative. But and the other choices that we listed here is organizations focusing on gaining operational efficiencies. Or the third choice, really be challenged with developing that talent, finding, hiring, and growing, retaining the right skill sets and the right talent to drive the organization forward. And the fourth choice here would be really maximizing, leveraging, implementing, a best practice, best of breed technology infrastructure. So we'll give a few more seconds for folks to stay in here and see the results in right now. And we'll invite Andrew and Sonia to comment as we look at and interpret the results as well. But probably not too surprising that savings and cost reduction remains the top choice, 48% audience here today, but followed pretty closely by the need to gain operational efficiencies at 33%. Technology infrastructure is next at 11%, probably related to to objectives A and B, getting operational efficiency through an improved and more efficient technology infrastructure, as well as driving saving cost reduction. Maybe a little bit surprising that the talent issue is as low as is in our poll at 7%. But Andrew, any thoughts here?
I would say that savings is sort of part and parcel with procurement's remit, and I don't think that that's going to change. I think that there is an ebb and flow, right? But in good times and in bad, procurement sourcing is going to be about savings, not solely about savings, but it is a significant part of the sourcing story very specifically. But again, I think that the mix of people, process, and technology, and finding that optimal mix, and making sure that you have the enablers in place so that your teams can execute, are at some level becoming much more blended and not viewed in silos. So I think that that mix across is going to be variable to a distinct perspective.
In many respects, these are not mutually exclusive. It's really about blending all of these objectives, being operational efficiency, getting the best talent, getting the best technology to drive savings and cost reduction, as well as drive that growth orientation that's mentioned with the supplier collaboration initiatives that they have in place. So great feedback from our audience as well. We'll have some more polls for you to weigh in on as we proceed here. One of the things that we did at Zycus is actually looked at some challenges on an industry-specific basis. So near to your heart, Sonia, in the food and beverage industry, we told your peers as well to kind of see what's top of mind in terms of key challenges as well as focus areas 2015. And the results vary a little bit here in that actually number one response, better than 50%, said they're focused on gaining those operational efficiencies, followed closely by the cost reduction and that we've mentioned, and some of the others here that are interesting as well. For instance, 40% have recognized the potential and the impact of social media. So especially in a consumer-oriented industry such as food and beverage, get in touch with the market demand, the consumer response, as a way to drive the whole supply chain initiative and demand management, probably more prominent in food and beverage perhaps even than some other industries. And the other responses here including really then aligning based on those triggers coming from the market, such consumer demand signals that you from social media or other inputs, then aligning supply chain operations to meet that customer demand and making sure, I want to hear that the key infrastructure provides the visibility, planning, and execution to make all that happen. So that's a little bit of data specific to it. And on that theme, Sonia, to see if you could comment then, in your business, your industry in particular, some of the key areas that you're focused on and the value levers that you see being to leverage for your organization in 2015 as regards strategic sourcing.
Some of our focus areas have been just look at our current processes and looking at ways to eliminate just waste, right? Kind of the lean methodology. So that's been just not in sourcing, but in actually our finance organization. And I'll talk a bit about that in a little bit as an example. Also focusing on category management and supplier relationship management, and just getting a better understanding of there's a lot in category management where there's a lot that you can focus on, but really what is the key is that right, we have a limited number of resources. Where are the areas that we should focus on? Having a key, a good laid out category management plan helps you deliver those very effectively. And also on supply relationship management, right? We have a huge network of suppliers, and we need to understand where is our primary focus with our partners. going back on, eliminating wasteful processes. So one of the things, right, I think there was a question, right, it's very difficult to get, we're growing as an organization here at Gallo, and, in a sourcing organization, it's not an easy sell to say, hey, we need more people, right? I think in an organization is that you always have to make the business case, and sometimes when you do get it, it's not in the time that you need them. So one of the things that we've been looking is looking at our current processes, where are we spending our time, and trying to utilize our supplier network and understand capabilities, and to see if there's any way that we can shift some of the work that we're doing, right? I'm seeing this a lot in my corporate services, in the services area, in trying to pass those services along to our suppliers. So, and it's a very kind of simple example, but every time, we've had a couple of acquisitions, and when we get a new winery, we also absorb the vehicles, right, within that property, and transferring those vehicles over to our winery, it's pretty extensive, right? It's time consuming, and I had an analyst, right, get all the paperwork and go to D&V and register them, and basically say, hey, is that really value add, right? Should you be focused on that? And he looked into it and talked to one of our suppliers that helps buy vehicles for our behalf, and asked them, hey, do you guys provide this service? And they did. Right, we shifted that service that we did internally outward, right? And so that's a task that he doesn't have to be responsible for. So that's kind of a creative way of how to offset some of that time and utilizing your supplier base and their network.
Well, Sonia, absolutely. Like the fact that you kind of to focus on the supply side of the equation, so it's not just inwardly focused, it's how can we bridge the capabilities and talents of the supply base to greater value, and really engage that and leverage that supplier network as a strategic asset for the business. I think extremely helpful in that regard. So talk about some of the CPO'S top drivers for future success, Andrew. Maybe a temporary challenge from a connectivity standpoint for Andrew, and I expect he'll be rejoining us momentarily. But as you can see from the research that Ardent Partners has published here, refer back to earlier point that Andrew had made, the top of the list here is from a host standpoint, and Andrew is back. So early engagement, we're glad to have you early or late in having you engaged at any point. So great to have you back.
Sorry about that, folks. So what I think I mentioned at the top, right, that sourcing remains as relevant as it's ever been to procurement and to CPO'S specifically. When you look at the game changers, right, so this is a question that we asked for the first time that basically said, what are the things that will get your procurement's organization's performance to the next level? And 2 out of 3 CPO'S said we need earlier engagement on sourcing opportunities. And I think that those of you that have been in sourcing for a long period of time, or even a short period of time, know that getting involved sooner in a sourcing project can make the difference between acting as an active project leader or as a simple order taker, right? Our research through the years has confirmed that view, has shown that getting the sourcing team involved earlier on a project can also drive savings, improve quality, and reduce risk. And from my own time as a strategic sourcing consultant, right, when you have time to rationalize specifications, when you have time to do proper diligence and develop the right sourcing strategy, when you have time to go out and if need be, do an RFI, it becomes a game-changing strategy. And it's something that I think it's great to see that acknowledgement. Now what I think CPO'S and sourcing teams need to do is figure out how to get that earlier engagement. So let's look at some of the capabilities on the next slide here that in general, right, these numbers have continued to increase. We see some process standardization, which we think is a good thing, right? When you start to think about scalability, when you start to look at how you're expanding the role that procurement is playing within the organization and taking on more categories, more sourcing activity, and expanding the influence, we see that 60% or two-thirds of procurement organizations have what at some level are basic table stakes, but those numbers continue to trend up. To the next slide, little less positive when we start to look at visibility within the organization, right? And I think that this is probably something that speaks or is very near and dear to your heart, Richard. But having visibility into spend, having visibility into process, having visibility into performance, they're the critical underpinnings of what really drives a procurement organization towards the best in class, right? I was just meeting with a global procurement leadership team today, and was really talking about the challenges that a procurement team has to go out and say with a straight face that they're a strategic organization within the enterprise. If they don't know the spend that they have, if they don't know the critical data that really should be driving everything from resource allocation and focus to how do you get better engaged with the different stakeholders. So, a lot of opportunity for improvement. Again, I think some level, the evolution of the procurement organization is obviously an ongoing story, but lots of opportunities and lots of upside for those of you that have careers in sourcing. Let's look at the next slide, and again, one that sort of a mixed bag here. We look at the technologies that are adopted and the enterprises that are leveraging technology to really drive their strategic sourcing programs forward. It's still the exception and not the rule that organizations have streamlined and fully automated their strategic sourcing processes. I think one of the major themes of the report and something that we're going to highlight in a little bit is that, when organizations focus on a specific area like spend analysis, there can be great value and an ROI on automating that part of the process. But when you begin to link these processes together, and as we saw in a couple of slides ago, that there are now a set of organizations are taking their spend data and turning it into value as part of the sourcing process, right? But it's really the connectivity of those solutions and linking those to the processes is really where you get the exponential value and where sourcing becomes much more exciting. So I want to share with you a few on the next couple of slides, some benchmarks, right? So sort of go through and sort of talk about a few of these at a high level, right? So we look at these as the primary value drivers for procurement organizations today. So the average procurement organization manages a little bit more than 60% of their spend, right? And we think that that's a very critical and important metric for procurement organizations to focus on because it speaks to the opportunity that procurement teams have to influence the organization to drive savings if that's the goal of the category, to help ultimately the business make smarter decisions. This target for 2015 for the average procurement organization is 6.6% of the total spend that they manage. That number is near all decades low, and again is tied in part to the business cycle and the fact that over the past 5 years, the amount of competitive sourcing that we've seen in the marketplace has really just shot up very dramatically. As we see here, almost half of all addressable spend is being sourced by these teams. Compliance remains an area that has significant room for improvement. But now let's look at some of the supply benchmarks on the next slide here. And I think that when organizations think about the cost of supplier management, and we're going to talk about some of those solutions in a little bit, because we do think that becomes part of the overall strategic sourcing process, one of the 4 pillars. We do see that organizations are Pareto is generally in effect, from an enabled suppliers number, right? So this is the number that we continue to see inch forward forward each year, and we think that this is a number that becomes increasingly important to track as you start to analyze your own supply base and identify those strategic suppliers, the ones that are coming to your supplier industry days and the ones that you're expecting to partner with and make investments in you as the customer and vice versa. They're spending a lot of their time wondering if their invoices have been received, much less when are they getting paid. It creates a sort of an aura or a fog around the entire relationship. And so enabled suppliers, we think, is by necessity becoming a more important metric to track and to focus on increasing. High-risk suppliers, right, there's not a lot of context here from the standpoint that, I think that this number is something that becomes important at the industry-specific level. Let's go to the next slide and look at a few sourcing metrics. Again, with the time here, maybe I'll just pull out one or two, and since those of you on the phone, or about half of you, said that you're focused on savings, let's look at the first here. And so, there's a reason why procurement is sourcing more and is more engaged, and it's because sourcing teams can add value to the process, right? And sometimes that's in the savings aspect, sometimes it's in the quality aspect. Sometimes it's mitigation. There's a variety of value drivers in a sourcing project. But one thing I would call people's attention to is that the average savings identified in an online competitive bid, so those sourcing projects that leverage an e-sourcing tool save, it doesn't look like much here, but when you look at, you apply that 1.1% to the $5 million project, or to the, figure out what your total sourcing activity is in your sourcing pipeline, that becomes a very significant number. And there's a variety of reasons why we've been, very strong proponents at Ardent that e-sourcing should be utilized for any sourcing activity that results in a contract. But let's talk a little bit about the 4 pillars here, and then really go to the next piece here and introduce the concept of best-in-class strategic sourcing with the next slide. And what we see, so in every Ardent Partners reach effort, we will segment the respondents based upon how they perform in certain areas. Now, from a procurement operational standpoint, procurement performance standpoint, we would tend not to use a metric like sourcing, but because sourcing is sort of a primary focus of sourcing teams, because savings is a primary focus of sourcing teams, and because of the sort of throughput volumes that sourcing teams are able to support in a given year, those are the two metrics we've utilized in this study and in years past to define best-in-class sourcing performance. And what we see here is that best-in-class sourcing teams over the past year have saved more than 6% on their total spend managed, and that they're sourcing more than 40%. And so I think it's sort of interesting, and Richard, I'll pass it back to you. Right, you're talking about savings here. Some things on the next slide to share.
Andrew, one of the things that we've heard consistently from our customer base in collaborating with them is that one, implementing a rigorous category management process and enabling it with a technology to gain greater efficiency and throughput. From a standpoint, unfortunately, the work's not over. Many of them then struggle with, okay, we've done the hard work of sourcing, now how do we track the savings? I think that's a pretty universal challenge. The organizations are really having to develop more rigor around savings tracking, really to get credit for what the contribution is from the sourcing and procurement teams to the business. And what we're seeing is that most organizations, 60%, are forecasting savings, and look at this sort of inverted pyramid funnel here. That starts with the expected savings that from a bid or negotiation process, and a methodology to put everything on the table. Expected hard and soft savings, so that includes, cost avoidance. For instance, when you're negotiating a multi-year agreement, looking at the savings that will be accruing in the period as well as the out years of that contract, and oftentimes those out years would be just cost avoidance, for example, or taking into account some of the softer savings or process-related efficiencies, that deal with reducing the level of effort to gain cycle time efficiencies and just overall productivity. So that kind of starts there at putting all those potential savings on the table, but then goes through a full life cycle where next realized savings for the current accounting period are calculated, being able to compare, for instance, the price paid in a per price variance type analysis in the current contract versus the prior contract, and then extrapolating that over the expected volumes. Organizations were challenged with getting to the next layers in this savings pyramid, if you will, is turning those realized savings into actual savings in that acknowledged by the budget owners, and there's either a direct budget impact in that the savings are removed from the budget, or there's savings get reinvested or reallocated to other activities. And the final step in the process is the actual bottom line hard savings, which budgets are affected such that it actually shows up on the income statement, the balance sheet, or the cash flow statement, and become acknowledged by the finance management, by the controller, the treasurer's office, for example, in that those savings actually matriculated to the bottom line in that case. So we're seeing more and more focus on savings management, being able to track and analyze savings through various stages and different categories of savings as well. So at this point, Sonia, I'd like to get again your expert firsthand practitioner view and kind of understand how do you look at savings at Gallo? How do you measure and how do you track savings from the standpoint of your own methodology?
So looking at the slide, so basically we track within those buckets. We do track cost avoidance as well. It's funny because this is something that I think in the past couple of years we go back and forth and redefine each of the buckets with finance. And so we do have a tracker. We have a department tracker that we have all kind of aligned on the definitions, and everybody goes in at a monthly basis and updates their hard savings, and then what are cost avoidance, and then negotiated savings. The actual savings, that's a little bit more challenging for us on capturing, hey, what is the contract price versus what we're purchasing. Then what we do is then that gets measured, and we review it at our monthly staff meeting just to see how we're tracking for the end year goal.
Thanks for that feedback, Sonia. So it sounds like savings tracking is certainly something that's top of mind for you and gets a lot of focus in your business. As when to that point, we wanted to get take the pulse of our audience today on this topic, which seems to be so prominent, and really as you look at the options here to figure out which of the following savings do you measure. Is it on hard savings? That's kind of the key focus area. Is it avoidance? Always acknowledged or recognized by your counterparts in finance, of course. Is it number 3, kind of the forecast or expected savings? Number 4, to go to actual savings, doing that true up, consent of the negotiated agreement to the prior agreement and the purchase price variance year over year, or does it go to number 5, actual budget impacts? See that the scenes have been removed the budgets, or is it number 6, more of those non-price, more of the process efficiency benefits that come from automation or process improvement? So a few seconds to end, and as folks are responding to the polls, Andrew, invite you into the conversation and say, in your experience, what do you see as the main focus areas from a savings tracking standpoint across these categories?
So I mean, I think we see some data here. I mean, this is actually a question that we've asked. We're not presenting it today, but I'd say about 3/4 of the market, when they think about savings, they're thinking about, I guess I would call it here, actual savings, or we might describe it as implemented or realized savings.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's it's where the rubber meets the road. What was actually realized, and certainly you'd expect that upstream of that, many more folks probably are forecasting expected savings, but maybe just receives a lot more attention when it's that tangible that it can actually be counted and verified by doing that kind of a purchase price variance contract comparison.
Right.
Excellent. Okay. So just a little bit more about just to share with you again from some of the research that we've done ourselves at Zycus, looking at, and one of the reasons we're so interested in this, we've seen the demand and focus on this area, and have actually developed a dedicated module to provide really an enterprise level software capability instead of maybe a bunch of different spreadsheets, as a way to kind of get agreement on what is the definitions of the different savings categories or stages, what are the formulas for calculating them, getting sign-off by the right owners and financial managers and controllers to make this a rigorous process. And so we have a vested interest in polling what the best practices are in the space. And as we looked at, the different savings categories, et cetera, probably not too surprising that when you look at one end of the continuum, most frequently measured at 73% is, in fact, those hard dollar savings that can actually be counted, that are verified, financed, that be attributed to the financial statements, et cetera. And on the other end of this continuum, least credence, I guess, is given to the less tangible savings, the non-price or more process efficiency benefits at just 28%. So some different perspectives there as well. So we want to continue on then with some of the guys that differentiate, as you addressed earlier, Andrew, what constitutes best-in-class performance versus everyone else.
Right. So we talked about, savings and where we drew the lines to begin the segmentation. But what we're showing you here are the averages within each of those two maturity classes, right? So the best in class represent the top 20% of performers in the marketplace, and all others are the other 80%. And what you start to see is that when you begin to push into the market averages, the industry benchmarks, you see one group that's doing extraordinarily well, doing all of the right things, and then you see the majority of other sourcing organizations going along at a fair pace, to be sure, but with lots of room for improvement when you look up and down the line, right? Not yet managing 50% of spend. And so, I think you'd go on to the next slide here, or
a poll question on this topic, and as our participants, our audience members are sort of weighing their responses, Sonia, I'd like to invite you again to kind of discuss, in your experience at Gallo, what are some of the key metrics tracked to assess how your organization is performing and how you define success?
We track basically what's on the slide here, 1 through 3. Spend under management, savings, percent spent sourced. Working on number 4, contract spend. But in addition to these, we also have specific metrics that we track for our technology. Just one way to kind of improve in, utilization and leverage. So we do have specific e-sourcing bid initiation goals that we track, and then also for the analytics, we have a specific metric of how much opportunities that we're finding from the tool as well.
And so I know Andrew had mentioned previously a metric around the percentage addressable spend that is sourced, and it sounds like you take that kind of step further to say how much of it is sourced through e-sourcing as well, and for good reason, as Andrew shared with us, that gains an incremental savings benefit through the utilization of the technology versus just a sort of standard sourcing practice. So we've got the poll open for respondents, and would all want to benchmark kind of where folks are across this continuum. You know, which are the key metrics for you? Is it number one, spend under management, number two, savings, number three, spend sourced, four, on contract spend, or five, compliance from a transactional stand? And the results are in. And again, we kind of have a consistent theme that savings is still the most key driver, key trick being tracked, both actual and expected savings. Spender management certainly is a contributing factor to the ability to achieve those savings, and that's next at 21%. So very similar to your experience as well, Sonia, that you mentioned those first three are the ones that you're most consistently tracking and developing metrics for the others, with especially compliance-related metrics. So yeah, very illustrative there. So we want to segue then, Andrew, so what are the strategies that are really best leading indicators of success?
Yeah, right. So great. So I mean, I think what you see here, right? So you know, by and large, you know, the best in class are going to be more organized. They're going to be more automated. They're going to be more standardized. You know, for organization to manage 70% or 80% of spend to source at the levels that they're doing, they have to have scalability in place. And so, you know, one of the things, so you see these items here, but as we move forward into the next couple of slides, you know, we're going to, you know, do analysis that really looks at how best-in-class organizations are linking together what we're calling the four pillars of strategic sourcing. And I just want to spend a minute here. I think that the first three chevrons across the top, spend analysis, sourcing, and contract management, I think are pretty well understood to be the classic, you know, again, 5, 10, X number step sourcing process. But what we started to introduce, and part of that has been with the introduction of newer technologies, is the consideration of supplier management, the management not only of the supplier's information, but of their performance, and to also measure and understand the risks associated with those suppliers. So walk you through this next section pretty quickly, just given our time, but let's look at spend analysis. And, you know, again, you know, you think about the technologies and who's adopted them. The best in class in each of these four pillar areas have adopted the solutions to a greater degree, but they've also within their organizations, you know, driven higher user adoption, right? So the number you see here is what percentage of the best in class have fully automated spend analysis, and that's 43.3%. But they're also getting more value out of those solutions. So maybe go to the next slide, and you see that, you know, there is linkage between having scalable, repeatable processes in place and actually linking that to value, right? And when you think of spend analysis, right, I mean, clearly understanding your spend is important, but, you know, where the rubber hits the road and how you begin to translate that information to value is in sourcing. And so let's actually go to the next slide. And, you know, this is a number that I continue to be, you know, displeased by the simple fact that, you know, from our perspective, the e-sourcing solutions, you know, are very mature. The ROIs on sourcing solutions that are not even, you know, that are well deployed, but not heavily used are right there, and that we still are pushing forward with the view that if your organization is negotiating a deal with a supplier and that results in a contract, that an e-sourcing tool is the ideal mechanism and really should be mandated for usage. Go to the next slide and we can see what some of the capabilities are, right? When you think of the areas that procurement organizations are strongest in, it's in the sourcing process area, it's in sort of the transactional procurement areas, and again, it's the best in class and their ability to link the pillars together and to draw them together, I think, is becomes very important. So let's look at the two contract areas very clear here, right? So contract repository, right, is the I guess oftentimes starting point for organizations that are looking to move from a fully paper-based or Word environment and to get something that provides some level of visibility to the larger organization. Best-in-class adopting this at a significant amount, and what we see on the next slide is how that's translated into, or we'll see here actually, contract authoring. See here, right, is this is the use of solutions that are really designed to help organizations standardize their supplier or procurement contracts, and so lots of opportunities here for continued growth and usage, and what you see is how that translates into capabilities. On the next slide is that when you have systems in place, you're able to really pull that linkage between processes together. It allows you to enact best practices. It allows you to mitigate against risk. And maybe move now to the next area here, the fourth pillar, and it's supplier management. We're going to look at a couple of the areas here. Supplier performance management, which we believe that as part of a closed-loop sourcing process, right, it becomes very valuable to understand how your incumbent suppliers are performing today, because that can determine at some level how you prioritize, the sourcing activities that you have to manage with different resources, right? And we think that this is a newer opportunity for procurement organizations to be more progressive in how they're thinking about supplier management. So supplier performance management, you go to the next slide here, and you see supplier information management. There are costs to managing suppliers, and with the not necessarily new solutions, but putting this type of solution into the context of the broader strategic sourcing process, we think is a wise way to think about how you have and manage and understand, your suppliers. So if we look at the next slide here, we can look from a capability standpoint, right? Solutions, help from help standardize processes. They help streamline those processes. They help make them scalable. From a supplier standpoint, right, having an ability to control things like their remittance information and things that can ensure that they paid sooner are all valuable. I mean, much less the performance and risk management components. But Richard, I think you've also looked at technology adoption and what some of the drivers are. And maybe.
Thanks, Andrew. And undergirding those four pillars, if you will, is certainly a best-in-class, best-of-breed technology capability. And this data reflects a study that we do with Michigan State, kind of more from an enterprise level. What were the drivers for adopting procurement technology in the first place to get better integration and visibility, to surface more savings opportunities, achieve savings targets, et cetera. But as we all know, at the individual user level, their willingness to adopt a new technology is going to be a parcel of achieving any of these overarching goals. And, to that point, I wanted to, again, Sonia, get your perspective on, how has your experience been from a user adoption standpoint of procurement technology, and what are some of the strategies you've utilized to improve improve overall technology adoption rates?
So for I'll speak specifically to e-sourcing and iAnalyze. So on e-sourcing, that technology in a way lends itself to adoption because it kind of mirrors the RFP processes and it resonates with the team. So one of our focus areas has been on the iAnalyze, the spend tool, where it's not as intuitive, I think, for folks to kind of drill into the data. So some strategies that we focused there have been, of course, hands-on training. We've had kind of understanding the data, right? We've now have the opportunity, to get that we can see the spend at granular data, and having people understand what that means, where it comes from, and then just increase the awareness process when we upload the data, how frequent it is, and also just having leadership support. One of the key strategies to make it simple, because there's a lot of different ways to find opportunities. So one of the initiatives this year was to find early payment discounts. Right? We just made it very simple and asked everybody, hey, look at your suppliers and find one or two suppliers that were either not getting early paid discounts or where we can get early paid discounts. So that was a huge initiative early in the year. We've made lots of progress on and implementing. So getting people to feel that they've found a quick win, and then that gets them more engaged to then continue looking further.
The focus from a technology standpoint these days is an integrated end-to-end suite of tools for sourcing and procurement, but there's some obvious benefits to having that integration. But what I hear you saying, Sonia, as well, is on an individual tool basis, it's not a one-size-fits-all from an adoption standpoint. Sometimes tools like e-sourcing can be readily adopted by sort of the mainstream user base because it mirrors their current process, but sometimes a center of excellence approach works as well. So great insights. And to give a summation here, Andrew, for all the ground we've covered today, what do you see as some of the strategies for success?
So, I mean, I would say, first that, sourcing remains, sort of, one of the primary methods for procurement organizations to navigate the fast-moving business landscape. And I'd note again that, today's presentation is based upon a report that's available from Zycus, the State of Strategic Sourcing 2015 4 pillars of sourcing success, and that will provide a much more elaborate discussion of each of these strategies. But if I were to pick one or two to focus in on today, I would say that, when two-thirds of the market, two-thirds of CPOs say that if we can get engaged sooner in the sourcing process, that's a real game changer for us, that organizations, up and down the line should begin to focus very deliberately on how to get that done. And there's a variety of strategies you can utilize to do so, but putting it on the radar screen as a top priority is likely to be that lever that gets your organization to the next level. It's talked a little bit about each of the 4 pillars, and I know that it was a fast tour through each of these areas, but I think that one of the things that we're introducing or really emphasizing more this year and maybe a little bit last year, but certainly going forward, is that supplier management programs should also be part of the strategic sourcing process, right? Not necessarily the start of spend assessment to the contract, but the ongoing way that you ensure that you're bringing the highest value suppliers into your organization. And, sort of to conclude with the theme that when you connect the dots between the 4 pillars, it really serves as the foundation for world-class or best-in-class performance results.
Great framework for us, the 4 pillars, just to kind of share with the framework from a standpoint as we look at source to pay. This is kind of look at the end-to-end process of a comprehensive and integrated suite of to pay tools that are certainly part of the equation that we've discussed today, people, process, and technology. And I really want to thank today, Andrew and Sonia, for all the insights and expertise that you shared with us today. So I'd like to ask you for any final thoughts as well as we wrap up. I know you share with us a lot of very specific, tangible examples that lead to success, but any final thoughts on success strategies that you'd like to share?
Just, with any implementation of technology, I would just, my feedback was just to understand your current processes. I think technology is one thing, but if your processes are not, how can I say, corrected or looked at prior to implementing a technology, you will have, certain setbacks. So that would be a key takeaway, is just understanding the process and trying to correct those before, implementing a technology.
Or implement a bad process, right?
Yes, definitely.
Yes, you want best in practice, best in class process and technologies to work in concert. So thanks so much, Sonia. Really appreciate your expert advice and opinion and insights that you provided, as well as Andrew. Very compelling research that put together. And just in closing today, I wanted to make folks know that we'll be sharing a copy of the State of Strategic Sourcing Study, the 4 Pillars to Sourcing Success, as well as the slides from the webinar. We addressed some questions along the way, but had a lot of ground to cover. And any questions that come up afterwards, folks can feel free to reach out, to email those in. Use some contact information here for both myself and Andrew. We'll get back to you with answers to any more detailed questions that you'd like to ask, and hopefully take advantage of the research and content that Andrew's published. And thank again, everyone, today for participating in the webinar.